Hello and welcome to the Global Trade Made Easy podcast. In this podcast, we speak to the global trade leaders, innovators, and influencers from around the world and Australia. We talk about ideas that can disrupt your organization, industry, or even careers. So let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Tejas Oza, and we are back on Global Trade Made Easy podcast. So today, once again, we have David Lawson, who is the Assistant General Manager of the Trade Division as Austrade, which is Australian Trade and Investment Commission, which is a federal government organization. So, David, welcome to the show again.
Hey, thanks, Tejas. Great to get back and have a bit of a chat. Last time we talked about the bread and butter of trade. Let's sink our teeth into some meat and potatoes and maybe a splash of wine to top it off at the end. Look forward to chatting with you today.
Absolutely. Same here, David. Thanks a lot. Thanks again for joining. So let's talk about maybe a little bit about the Austrade once again, just to get the scene right when people know what Austrade is all about. Would you mind telling us a little bit about Austrade before we go further?
Excellent. Sure. Thanks, Tejas. So I work for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, and as Tejas you just pointed out, I'm in the trade division. There's also an investment division. Austrade also looks after the visitor economy, tourism being another major export source of exports for Australia. And we also have an export market development grant, so a funding program within Austrade. But we've been around for a long time. In fact, the first trade commissioners were, the service was set up in 1933. And the principle is that we help Australian exporters export. We help Australian exporters overcome the tyranny of distance by introducing customers in overseas markets through our overseas network. We've got a good footprint here in Australia, in all of the states. We partner with state governments through a program called Trade Start, so that whether you're in the cities or in rural and regional Australia, there's an export advisor or a global engagement manager who can help your business understand how to get into foreign markets. And then we have a great network offshore. We've got around about 110 offices around the world. And our staff offshore are working with customers or potential investors who might be looking for a commercial solution from Australia. So that's it in a nutshell. Over the last few years, our focus, and especially in the area that I look after, which is helping ag, food and consumer exporters, we've been really focused on helping our ag and food exporters primarily overcome some of the big disasters, frankly, that have really made things difficult for Australian exporters. There were two things. COVID obviously disrupted our supply chains and our ability to get all the aircraft stopped flying. So our ability to get our fresh produce into market was seriously curtailed. But also we had the impact of geopolitical events, and specifically, China closed its doors to a lot of our, high value food and agricultural products. And also there's the impact of things like the Ukrainian war, which really upset international supply chains. So there's been a really big impact. And our job in Austrade for the last few years has been to really help Australian ag and food exporters diversify into new markets, find new customers in new countries, and find out the best channel to market for Australian products. So it's been a busy time, but a really successful time as well. It's been great to be a part of that too.
Yeah, David, I can totally second that, because we have a number of clients who actually get help from Austrade.
Great.
And we know that they benefit so much from the Austrade's different programs. So I can really vouch for it. Yeah,
that's good to hear.
absolutely. So can I ask you? Let's go a little bit deeper into Austrade programs, etc. But before
Sure.
that, let's talk about what do you see are the biggest growth drivers in the Australian exports as you're helping the exporters right now?
Yeah. Look, the biggest growth drivers, the biggest growth driver is really overseas demand. And in our nearest neighbours in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, obviously you've got long-term growth of economy, but also growth of population in our near neighbours and near Asian markets. So, that's probably one of the biggest factors that influences Australia's export prospects. Our population is only about 25 million or so in Australia, but we produce enough food for about 70 million people. And we're really focused on getting our premium produce into those growth markets. As economies grow and get bigger and become more sophisticated, their ability to be able to manage supply chains means that we can get better quality produce, and we can ensure that that produce maintains its really super high quality all the way through to the consumer at the end of that whole supply chain. That's a really big determinant for growth. The other is, we talk about the geopolitical impacts such as COVID and China closing its doors. We're really pleased that China's starting to open its doors, by the way, and the war in the Ukraine. So those are negative things, but they're also really positive things that happen as we build and strengthen partnerships with our international partners. That drives demand as well. We talk about AUKUS and our strong, or the Quad, the strong relationship we have with countries like Japan, the US, and India. That too drives demand as we get better enmeshed in the supply chains for those key partner countries. The other thing is, one of the other big impacts really, which underpins the fact that Australia is such a strong export nation. We are really truly an export nation. Is not only the demand side from international markets wanting our high quality products, but also the supply side. We have an abundance. We see this with our mineral resources, with our critical minerals, with our energy resources and things like that. So our ability to be able to supply. Over the last year, 18 months, there have been big climatic disasters, there have been floods and things like that. But if you look at the whole of the Australian economy overall, actually it's been pretty good growing seasons, good rain across, all of the wheat belts, for example, which means that we've had an absolute abundance, bumper crops. Cotton is just, massively, which is so massively well endowed with cotton, for example, at the moment. So our ability to supply is also really determining that we can maintain really strong supply chains to bigger and further, bigger markets and much further afield. So, it always boils down to economics, but it's really weighed in our favour to make us a really strong exporter.
David, this is an excellent summary of all the drivers. So thank you. I think it's really interesting to actually have this whole holistic picture of all the drivers. I have a couple of follow-up questions here.
Yeah.
You mentioned about Quad. I think we are getting a Quad meeting in Australia very soon. Are there any initiatives, any specific programs or specific events where Austrade is participating, or of happening within the industry, given the Quad meeting happening soon?
Yeah, so with regard to specific meetings, we tend not to in certain areas. When we're talking about defence matters, for example, so we have a sizable defence manufacturing industry, and we're a crucial part for international supply chains. But when we talk about things like Quad, about AUKUS, whether we talk about the general architecture of international trade, things like APEC, we were a foundational member for APEC. These regional alliances that we have, the strong regional alliances that we have, there's a lot of emphasis at the moment on IPEF, which is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which we're building up here. Now, Australia is a really good citizen in the world market. We take these relationships really seriously. We invest in building these really strong relationships with partners. We talk about things like the rule of law. Strong trade is really determined by our ability to trust our neighbours and for them to trust us and our commercial partners. So we really, as a whole of government, we really commit to making sure that we've got great relationships, that we engage actively in all of these, what they call the architecture of relationships. The World Trade Organization is an interesting organization. There's a lot of emphasis on making sure that we're involved and actively helping to negotiate within that World Trade Organization framework for things like the mechanisms to help resolve disputes. We've got a couple of disputes on at the moment. We've actually hit pause on one of them, specifically Bali with China. But being involved in making sure that we are a valued and valuable contributor is a really important part of the international diplomacy, which helps support strong export growth by Australian companies.
No, that's true. I understand that. So one more follow-up question. We talked about some of the challenges as well as some of the positive things happening, being the trade agreements with other countries, etc. But talk about the challenges. So one of the challenges is, as we can see potentially happening, is the global downturn of economies and potential recession. What are your thoughts around that? How is Australia being prepared for that?
Yeah, this is always it's always an issue, Tejas. We're actually seeing the first hints, perhaps, in a slowdown in the Northern Hemisphere, because we're looking very closely at shipping rates, for example, and frankly, there is quite a slowdown. One of the really good indicators of the strength of the world economy is the shipping rates. So you look at the number of sailings between Shanghai and Los Angeles. That number is down. So it's getting there. We are seeing a slowdown. Interest rates mean every country is simultaneously raising interest rates to try and curb inflation. We've got a lot of pressure on things like real wages. Wages are fixed. Inflation just erodes into our real wages. And so people are going to be buying less. How do we prepare for that? We just need to really make sure that we, it comes down to the micro level. Everything comes down to the enterprise level, to make sure that you're keeping a good balance on your inventory. Don't overproduce. make sure you keep your cash flow, keep your payment terms short. And the really important thing in international trade is making sure at the enterprise level, making sure that you've got really good engagement with your customers offshore. How's it going? What are you seeing? Is the product moving? You haven't ordered for a month or so. When's the next container load order going to come through? What's slowing it down? How can we help you? Do we need to drop our prices? So really build and maintain that strong discourse, strong personal engagement with your customer, and make sure that you're not oversupplying to a market that's going to collapse underneath you.
Yeah, good points. So I'm guessing that the free trade agreement that Australia has been working on with various countries, obviously the recent one being with India, where we have the interim agreement signed, and we are still pushing for the full trade agreement in completion very soon. I'm hoping, and there are some other countries we are talking to. So these are all initiatives where I guess Australia is also being prepared for, how do you manage the issue of demand? It is there continuously.
Yeah, good questions, Tejas. So you're right. We're going to that. Being a good neighbour and really good partnerships means we can get some really good deals with free trade agreements. Historically, we've had some great ones with the US back in, when was that, 2005, 2015, and around then with Japan, Korea, with Malaysia and other countries. They're really good quality free trade agreements. Now, there are two elements to free trade agreements. One is tariffs are dropped and also quotas increase. Now, at an enterprise level, when a tariff drops, you need to look at the savings. You're going to be passing on savings. At the end of the day, the customer is going to be paying less because the tariff has dropped in the importing country. And you need to talk to your importer. Are you going to pass on all of those costs to the consumer, or are you going to kind of pass some of the costs on and then split the difference with the importer so that you spend more money marketing the product as well? So these kinds of things are really important. You need to prepare for that. And, it's really exciting to see when those agreements come into place, the first outcomes. So, for example, you cited India, and, that's a pretty good agreement. But the in-depth negotiations will be continuing. But, I mentioned, let's get into the meat and potatoes. So one of the really good outcomes for India, in fact, is lamb. We all have eaten some wonderful Indian lamb curries, I'm sure, but, there's really strong demand from India for lamb. And there's a really large Australian lamb producer called Fletcher International Exports, or Fletchers. So, they're a massive exporter. They were preparing for it, and as soon as the agreement opened up, they were really quick to get into the Indian market. Fletchers is an enormous company, our biggest exporter, lamb exporter. They're in 100 markets around the world. But after the ratification of the agreement, they were the first into the Indian market. And, let's not lose sight of the fact that the whole Indian retail market is around about, it's just under about $500 billion US. It's a massive market. And of that, food is about $340 billion US. This is an enormous market. So, for that to open up and for Australian companies to get into the Indian market, that's terrific. Great opportunities, and a whole lot of other food products that are going to be, getting into the Indian market. Indians, I'm told that Indian men tend to drink spirits and beer, and Indian women tend to drink wine. So, and it's a big market. but we're really hopeful for some strong growth for Australian wine in the Indian market. That's going to take a little time. And for Australian wine exporters who might be listening to the podcast, I understand that things will take time, but gradually we hope to see some good growth in the Indian market. India's one, but of course, just recently, the Prime Minister, when he was in the UK, meeting with the UK Prime Minister, also announced that the Australia-UK FTA will come into force on the 29th of May, so at the end of this month. Now, that's just going to be another fantastic opportunity. About like 99% of all the food products that go into the UK will have a reduction in tariffs. Also, there'll be an increase in the quotas that the UK will allow into Australia. So there's great prospects there. And I understand from DFAT that negotiations are continuing, and they're getting towards the tough end of negotiations with the EU. And we're really, really hopeful for a good announcement later this year about an EU FTA as well. So a lot of really good positive moves for future growth for Australian exports.
Really exciting to know this, David. So let's talk about opportunities. So having spoken about opportunities, about trade agreements, etc. So let's can I request you to tell us what are the upcoming opportunities, grants, or Austrade programs that Australian exporters actually need to know about, so that they can actually leverage all these potential growth options and opportunities?
Yeah, so for many, many years, Austrade has had the export market development grants. Now, this is it's a rules-based system that if you're an Australian, I'm not going to explain all the details here, but I do encourage you to look at the austrade.gov.au website. And if you search for EMDG, or Export Market Development Grants, so there's a whole lot of details there. It's designed to help defray some of the costs associated with market development for your product. So this is it's primarily aimed at early stage exporters. So if you're a large exporter already, it's not for you. Chances are you may already have used the MDG over the years, but it's really designed to help companies, do that. It's designed to help defray the costs associated with getting into new markets and expanding your exports into new markets. That's just the blue ribbon grant program that we have. So as of recording today, we're well into May. We've just had the budget announced. Our executive is fine-tuning our business plan for next year. And by the end of this financial year, so, by the end of June, early July, we'll have a comprehensive list of the calendar entries for all of the major trade shows that we'll be supporting around the globe over the next financial year. Some of those are, the big mining shows, for example, to help support our mine technology. We always participate in the big biotech conferences. We partner with the Australian Department of Defence to go into the big defence trade shows. And in the ag and food and consumer space, we perennially get involved in supporting companies exhibiting in things like FoodX in Tokyo, Food and Hotel Asia in Singapore, Gulf Food in Dubai, the International Food Exhibition in London, and the private label Manufacturers Association exhibition in North America. So these are things that we will be involved in helping support Australian exports. are also really excited that China's opening up again. And in fact, just earlier this month, I hosted a major delegation from a trade show that's called the China International Import Exhibition, CIIE. And this is held in Shanghai every year. It was launched in 2018 by President Xi. And I've never been there, but my colleagues who have been there say it is the biggest trade show in the world. And there's always really strong interest from Australia. So that'll be back now that the borders have opened with China and people can travel again. We expect there'll be a really big presence for Australia in that trade show in Shanghai. And speaking about borders being open, customers love to come to Australia and buy. So we work really closely with our overseas network who identify supermarket chains, for example, and these big buying conglomerates who haven't been able to travel down to Australia because their borders are being closed. They're coming back. And every day we're seeing more and more people coming into our office or we're accompanying visitors to come to factories and they come, they look at the product, they look at the way it's manufactured, they taste the product, they love it, and they place orders. So it's, these are the kinds of bread and butter things that we'll be supporting over the coming year as well.
Right. So you mentioned about the EMDG grant. You mentioned about how you are helping in global trade expos around the world. You mentioned about the global companies visiting Australia for sourcing goods, right?
Yes.
How do exporters take advantage of the last one which you mentioned? If they're listening to the podcast, if they are interested in tapping into what you mentioned about global companies coming here, what do they do?
Okay. Hope everyone has their pen handy. 132878. That's the Austrade hotline. Of course, you can register online. You can do that anytime, day or night. Just get onto the Austrade website and make contact with us. You may already be engaged, and you mentioned, Tejas, at the beginning of the conversation that a lot of your, a lot of the people listening today are already clients of Austrade. So reach out. Let us know that you're interested. We do work closely with companies who are engaging with us to make sure that they're aware of these opportunities that are coming, whether it's offshore or whether buyers are coming. We also work really closely with the state governments who also have similar support mechanisms. So if we know that somebody's coming into any of the states, we'll reach out and make sure that we really build a first-class itinerary for these buyers to make sure that we get the best quality product. The other thing is we really partner closely with the peak industry bodies. So, the industry association, the Table Grape Growers Association or the Seafood Industry Association, Wine Australia or any of those peak bodies, to let them know that buyers are coming through. And we work with them to make sure that we can maximize the exposure of Australian exporters to buyers that we know who are coming down. Nice.
I'm hoping a lot of people will be taking advantage of this offer. So, David, you mentioned about overseas companies coming here and looking at how the things are manufactured, how the products are manufactured, etc. And one of the things is becoming important globally is sustainability. Now, what are the implications, as you see, has this move towards sustainability on the Australian exporters?
Some see sustainability and the extra costs as, compliance as being an impediment, but let's look at it as an opportunity. Frankly, Australia is well known for the quality of produce that we have. We're an island nation. We spend a lot of money ensuring that we have really good phytosanitary protections to stop diseases coming into Australia. So that's really well known. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of effort. You know, we've all been through customs and as we come into the airports around Australia, and it's tough, but you know, it's for a good reason. So you should always look at sustainability and building sustainable, building net zero solutions into your supply chain, for example, so reducing carbon. It's a really good, unique selling point. If you invest in that, it will pay in dividends. And especially when we go into the sophisticated markets such as the EU, UK, and countries like Japan and Korea, and increasingly China as well. The fact that we've gone to the effort of complying with stringent sustainability criteria that markets might dictate, such as EU, or that we're ahead of the curve, that we're setting setting the benchmark for the quality produce that we produce. The investment that we make really pays dividends in international markets, because we can justify the price premium for our product because it's so much better. There's some really exciting work, I should say, with things like blockchain. So paddock to plate, continual blockchain verification that, you know, the cow that was growing in that paddock has, you know, not been exposed to any harmful medications, etc., all the way through, that there's been a continuous cold chain maintained all the way through. There's been fully phytosanitary compliant and humane slaughter of the cow, packing, shipping, so that when you scan the barcode there in the supermarket chain on the other side of the planet, you can be reassured that this is a really good quality piece of meat. So, you know, that's the kind of investment that Australia is making to ensure that we are, you know, well known for and well trusted for our quality product.
That's a really good point. You're talking about technology now. So let me ask you about that. So in your view, what role the technology plays in helping Australian exporters grow in the international markets, and also improving productivity, accelerate growth, etc.?
Yeah, great question, Ted. Look, you know, when I was first exporting to Japan, you know, when I first started my business, I was doing everything by fax, you know, and yet here we are, you know, with iPads, with microphones, you know, doesn't matter where we are, but we can deliver this kind of, informative value add just through technology. So that's you know, that's an exciting development. I'm going to answer that in two ways too, Tejas, because there's people. So at the enterprise level, I really want to encourage people to, you know, in their marketing campaigns, just really make sure that you are using your technologies to the best possible way. And when I refer to that, it could be just as simple. You get a marketing edge by the quality of your website, for example, making sure that you've got really good, really easily navigable website. That, you know, that spending a bit of time and money and effort in getting that right can really pay dividends. Having multi-language links so that customers can easily understand your product. A little trick I should just underscore here is, if you do have supply chains offshore, but you're also selling off your own website, make sure that you're not cannibalizing your own market. So your importer might be sitting there in Singapore and investing in building your brand into the market, but there's no use if then you sell to a Singaporean who's traveling down here and you ship it up, you ship a case of wine up to Singapore for half the price that they can buy it at the retail outlet in Singapore, you're just going to undercut your partner's business in that market. So just be really careful about that, how you use technology. Things like Instagram. I don't use Instagram, but, savvy shoppers do. So get your head around that. Employ the people that understand that to really make sure that you're using the tools to the best effect. The impact of artificial intelligence, Chat GPT and things like that. I've been dabbling with that a little bit myself. There's some really good efficiencies, I think, that you can get from using this kind of new technology. So be across the technologies that are coming through. But then you also see, some really sophisticated technology. And this kind of plays into the importance of why we attract foreign investment into Australia as well. Because foreign investment partners often bring new technology. I'm thinking of, the satellite-controlled tractors that, are, I just can't remember the name of the particular satellite, but there's one that goes over Japan and over Australia. So that satellite system can help control. You can get a better sense of your field. You can see if there's sufficient water, for example, in the field. You can monitor the growth of your crops. But you can also direct the tractor for remote harvesting. There's all kinds of new technologies, and foreign countries and foreign companies, I should say, invest in Australia because it's a worthwhile investment because of the greater efficiencies in production. So there's all kinds of great stories. In wine, for example, there's a company called Accolade, one of our biggest wine producers in Australia. So they've partnered with a technology firm called Movis, and they've got this, talking about artificial intelligence, they've got this machine. It's called the Movis Fit Machine technology. They've rolled it out at Berry Estates, one of the biggest wine producing areas in South Australia. And what this artificial intelligence, the machine learning fit machine, kind of measures the performance of the machinery involved in producing wine. So you can anticipate breakdowns in the technology. You can work accordingly and service your machines to make sure that you don't get breakdowns, so that you're always online, always producing, and you can just produce more efficiently. There's all kinds of technologies. It's great going to some of the technology conferences, for example, as well. And then you have alternate proteins. So just the science going into more efficient ways of producing proteins to feed the world. There's some great opportunities for Australia.
Thanks for that technology aspects of the technology, which is also helping exporters. Unashamedly, I should also have a plugin that Impact Stocks is also one of the technologies which can potentially help, and people can look it up. I will ask a last question now.
Yes.
And it is to do with the companies which are coming in Australia.
Yeah.
There could be importers who are coming in Australia to source, or even the producers or big companies who wants to have their presence here. They want to invest in Australia, produce in Australia, and then export from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for them?
Well, we are the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. So a big part of the work we do, in fact, is work with potential investors from offshore, understand what they're looking for, and then help them find the best site for their investment. We work really closely with the state governments, as I mentioned before, in helping these foreign companies make investments in Australia. And this, some of our biggest exporters from Australia are in fact foreign companies who've invested in Australia to produce product in the mining sector, all of the massive capital involved in building out our LNG sector. That's a lot of that is foreign capital. They bring the know-how. They just bring the enormity of their supply chains to be able to bring product to market and get it into their customer base. But one of the best little examples that I'm really intimately familiar with is, in fact, Sakata rice crackers. So I'm picking on a brand here, but Sakata rice crackers, great little several 100-year-old senbei or rice cracker manufacturer in Australia. In Japan, in regional Japan. The population's declining. The kids buy different product. They're putting money into, I don't know, toys and things like that, and they're not buying traditional rice crackers. The rice is 7 times more expensive. The water is 5 times more expensive than Australia. They came to Australia and said, you've got water, you grow rice. We think there might be a possibility for us to be able to manufacture our rice crackers and ship them back to Japan. So they set up down here in Australia, and they became a hit product. In fact, they were so popular, they never exported back to Japan because they couldn't keep up with demand in Australia. So they increased the size of their plant here. And then they started exporting to Southeast Asia. Years after I was involved in their some of the early stages of their investment, I was traveling in Vancouver in Canada. Went to a supermarket, Sakata rice crackers. They're exporting all over the world out of a base in Melbourne. So that's the kind of investment that Austrade helps companies make into Australia. And every day we're working with different prospects. Ferrero Rocher, they invested heavily maybe 10, 15 years ago in Australia. The crops are all coming online now, and they're a major exporter from Australia from their hazelnut plantations here in Australia. Yeah, so we look forward to, if there are people listening here that want to buy from Australia, the foreign companies listening that want to buy from Australia, either reach out to the Australian Embassy or the Australian High Commission, go to our website, find out the details of our local office, or get in contact with us here in Australia. And we can either help find a supplier from Australia or help them invest in Australia. So can you tell I'm really passionate about this job?
I can, absolutely, David. And it is such a pleasure to speak to you always. And I really want to thank you. I always learn a lot when I have a conversation with you about what Austrade doing and how what fantastic work Austrade is actually doing to help Australian exporters, as well as getting more investment in Australia. So yeah, hats off to you and the Austrade team.
Thanks,
I wanted to thank you one more time. Hopefully we will get you once again on our podcast later on.
Look forward to that.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot once again.
All right. Thanks, Tejas.
This has been the Global Trade Made Easy podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode of innovative ideas from trade leaders across the globe. For even more insights on global trade, visit our website at impexdocs.com.au, where we share resources for successful international trade management. Until next time, happy trading.